Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to National Farmers Union's 2021 Legislative Virtual Fly-In. I'm Rob LaRue, and it is my honor and privilege to serve as your national president. We pride ourselves at NFU on being the preeminent organization representing the voices of family farmers and ranchers and their communities. This week, hundreds of you from across the country will be talking to elected officials about our organization's priorities. We'll be talking about the need for fair and competitive markets in the farm and food economy. We will emphasize the importance of federal investment to strengthen our nation's infrastructure, from roads and bridges to rails to waterways to rural broadband. And we'll share stories about how disasters and climate change have impacted our family farms and ranches, and how Congress and the administration can take action to address these challenges. During this session, National Farmers Union Vice President Patty Edelberg and I will be introducing you to key leaders in government. We're very thankful for their willingness to spend the next hour and a half with us. During that time, we'll hear from Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack, who's been a strong and steady supporter of our work. Several other USDA officials will also be taking part in today's discussion, including Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Climate Advisor Robert Bonning, a longtime friend of Farmers Union, Farm Service Agency Administrator Zac Duchenneau, Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs Jenny Moffitt, and Senior Advisor for Competition Andy Green. We'll also spend time with U.S. Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta, who is the third highest ranking officer at the Department of Justice. But first, I have the great honor and privilege to introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden. Mr. President.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks to the National Farmers Union. As a nation, we need to make sure that your contributions and your challenges are recognized and respected. That's why the USDA is investing $1.4 billion for small producers, distributors, farmers markets, farm workers, meatpacking workers, and grocery workers impacted by COVID-19. That's why we increased the number of PPP loans to rural small businesses by 40% over the previous administration. And that's why we're expanding emergency drought assistance. That's why I signed an executive order that will level the playing field for small farmers. Because when big companies consolidate, they put the squeeze on you with lopsided contracts that make you pay more for seed than other inputs, paying you less for what you produce, and raising prices for all of us at the grocery store. Finally, that's why we're making sure that your farms and your businesses and your communities are fully dealt in as we build back better. My investments in roads, bridges, rail, waterways, high-speed internet is going to make it easier, faster, and cheaper to connect with markets you need to reach. So let folks know the investments that you need, and know that my administration and I have your back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the commitment you've shown to farmers in rural communities. And we look forward to continuing to work together with your administration and Congress to address these needs for our members. I'm now honored to introduce another person who needs really little introduction, Secretary Tom Vilsack. As a leader at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Secretary Vilsack is working to strengthen the agricultural economy, build vibrant rural communities, and ensure a safe and abundant food supply for all Americans. The Secretary has served as Secretary of Agriculture for 8 years under President Obama, where he regularly spoke at our annual flying gatherings. During his first tenure, Secretary Vilsack fought to put Americans back to work and to create a strong and sustainable economy. Secretary Vilsack was confirmed once again as Secretary in February of this year, and within a week joined us for our National Farmers Union virtual convention. Mr. Secretary, thanks once again for giving us your time.
Well, Rob, I'm happy to do this, but it's only fitting that a member of the NFU should be part of this fly-in. So I'm proud to be a member and continue to monitor what activities are taking place at the NFU in Iowa with a very aggressive effort here. And I want to thank you personally for the friendship and the partnership that we've had over the course of the last 7 or 8 months as this administration begins its task. It's been a great partnership, and I look forward to continuing that partnership with you and the members of NFU as we move forward on a very aggressive agenda. I'm going to touch on a few of those items today, and then hopefully I can respond to a couple of questions. Let me start where the president left, which was a discussion of the need for infrastructure investment. I want the folks who are watching this and listening to this today to understand fully and completely that this is a pivotal moment for the United States of America. If we're to remain competitive, we must invest in our infrastructure. We have had a competitive edge in agricultural exports for an extended period of time because of our infrastructure. Many of our competitors did not have the roads, the bridges, the airports, the ports, the rail system to be able to get product to market. But over time, our competitors have invested significant sums of money in improving their infrastructure. And we now risk the possibility that we will lose that competitive advantage. It is absolutely necessary that we improve our rail system, our inland water system, our ports, our airports, our roads, our bridges need to be improved. And that's precisely what the infrastructure bill passed in the Senate has called for. It has called for a record level of investment in roads and bridges. It's called for a significant investment in improving our inland waterways for the first time in quite some time. Our ports will be improved. Our rail systems will be more efficient, and our airports will be better. All of that will play to the strengths and purpose of the NFU to be able to get product to market and to be able to help farmers with their bottom line. The president mentioned broadband. And the reality is that in order for folks in the most rural and remote areas of this country to have a fair shake, to have a real chance of success, they've got to have access to broadband. And I don't just mean a broadband that doesn't provide adequate speeds, upload and download speeds. I mean a broadband that is actually significant in terms of allowing folks, regardless of where they live, to be able to use broadband to access markets and to be able to utilize that tool to be able to grow their farming operation. This infrastructure effort and the reconciliation bill, which is a companion bill, don't stop there. There are also investments in clean energy opportunities. We recently announced the Grand Aviation Challenge, looking at trying to create a 35 billion gallon biofuel industry for drop-in aviation fuel, which will create new opportunities for farmers across the United States. And investments in biorefineries and biofuel operations, also part of what is being considered by Congress, as well as climate smart agricultural investments that folks on the panel today will go into greater detail on. All of this is designed to make our economy more competitive, to embrace the challenge of the 21st century and to meet that challenge. So we need your help. We need your help in explaining to our friends in Congress, the House and the Senate, that despite whatever differences they may have about size and about how it gets paid for, that they need to work through those differences because the American public, NFU members, are counting on them to get this done. And so this is an incredibly important time for American agriculture as it relates to infrastructure. It's also an important time to make sure that we have fair and competitive markets. We recognize at USDA that far too few farmers are able to make the majority of their income from their farming operation. And that's why we've committed to more new and better markets. And when we talk about more new and better markets, we start with markets that are fair to all farmers, fair to all producers of all sizes. And that means investing in local and regional food systems, but it also means strengthening the Packers and Stockyards Act. We, as you will hear from Andy Green, are working on that as we speak. We have several rules that are in the process of being formulated. We anticipate and expect we would start with a poultry rule and then move to the unfair practices rule and then move to the scope of practice rule in order to get the Packers and Stockyards Act as strong and as strengthened as possible. In the meantime, we've provided frequently asked questions and guidance on how we see this Packers and Stockyards Act expanding significantly the reach of the act in order to make sure that people are protected against retaliation and discrimination and other unfair practices. We're going to continue to work on this. We expect and anticipate that the poultry rule we should see some movement on this by November, and hope to be able to see a published rule the first part of 2022, following thereafter the unfair practice rule and the scope of practice rule as well. We're very committed to greater price discovery, and you all know, I think, appreciate the fact that we've also begun to invest significant resources and commit significant resources to expanding processing capacity. I've heard this from NFU members for quite some time of the need for additional packing and processing facilities, and we're going to meet that goal. We have committed $500 million, looking for ways to leverage those resources to be able to expand significantly processing capacity. We're also supporting the small and very, very small processing facilities with additional grants and opportunities for them to expand their operations to potentially take full advantage of interstate sales as opposed to intrastate scales. So the Packers and Stockyards, more competitive markets, more price discovery, and a greater opportunity for expanded processing capacity are all part of the agenda that we are very aggressively pursuing at USDA. I'm just going to touch on one other issue, Rob, and then I'll be happy to turn it over to you for any questions that we may have. And it's a companion issue to the issue of Packers and Stockyards, and that's the product of the U.S. labeling. I know that NFU folks are very interested in that, and here's what I can tell you. Surveys were done when we were involved in the cool legislation and litigation to determine whether or not people value, if you will, the label, product of the U.S., made in the U.S., however you want to characterize it. Those surveys were not complete. They didn't fully address whether or not people actually understood exactly what it means when we say product of the U.S., whether there's potential confusion, whether there is a situation where people may take unfair advantage, or do people place a value? In other words, are they willing to pay an additional cost or price for that made in the U.S. or product to the U.S. label? So we're going to do a survey to make sure that we have the factual basis upon which we can make a determination when folks are unfairly and improperly using that product label, and making sure that we are diligent in making sure that it's applied only to products that are indeed products of the U.S., and make a determination as to whether or not consumers actually place a significant monetary value on that label. So look for that activity to take place over the course of the next several months, and hopefully we'll get some clear direction in the latter part of next year after the survey is completed. So a lot of activity. I know there are a lot of questions. I didn't touch on climate because I'm sure that other folks will touch on climate, but look forward to the questions. And again, appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. Very much appreciate the passion and compassion you all have in terms of the family farm operation across the country.
Thank you very much for those comments. And we are going to turn to some questions here. And one of the first questions is actually regarding the competition efforts that the administration is undertaking. Both the president and you have touched on those. We've certainly been trying to share that information with our members. One of the questions that comes up frequently is what makes this effort in some of these areas different than in years past? So I thought it might be a good opportunity if you could speak to the White House Council on Competition and what the government-wide effort looks like.
Well, I respond a couple ways to that, Rob. Number one, of course, what makes this different is the $500 million that we at USDA we've identified for processing. But it's not just the USDA. The entire White House, the entire government, across the Department of Commerce, the EPA, there are a variety of entities that are at the table in connection with the president's executive order, suggesting that we need to be taking a look at issues along the supply chain to determine whether or not there are imbalances, if there are unfairness, if there is inequity, and basically come up with a significant plan to address those inequities. The USDA has been upfront, and I think has been probably more aggressive in this space in the first couple of months because we had the resources under the American Rescue Plan. And I know that this is something that you all at NFU care deeply about. And I want to say that I really appreciate the fact that you are going to launch an effort here over the course of the next several months to provide support out in the countryside for what the president and his team are trying to do. This is really fundamentally the opportunity of a lifetime, opportunity to really level the playing field. There is absolutely now a recognition, I think, in the government, across the government, that when cattlemen lose money and consumers pay more money, but processors make record profits, that there's an inequity here that needs to be straightened out and balanced. Now, folks can give me 1,000 different reasons why that is so, but at the end of the day, that is not a fair system. If the producers and the consumers are getting taken and record profits in the middle, there's got to be an effort here to change that dynamic in that equation. And that's why we think competition, that's why we think greater price discovery, that's why we think it's important to engage in the activities. And that's why the Commerce Department and the Justice Department will be engaged in looking at all of these issues to determine whether or not there are other issues in terms of antitrust that also need to be focused on. We know that there's price fixing. There's an indictment for price fixing. We know that's caught the attention of the Justice Department. You'll probably hear more from the Justice Department today. So we're working hand in glove with the Justice Department. As they ask for information on the market, we're providing it. I think they are aware of how little price discovery there really is, which is why we recently announced 2 additional studies to try to open up the door a little bit here and to basically find out precisely where things are. So the work of NFU to help us sort of amplify the importance of this work and amplify the fact that this administration is on the side of folks who are fighting the big guys, I think is going to be incredibly important.
Patty?
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Mr. Secretary. My next question has to do with infrastructure. The USDA has been investing in rural telecommunication infrastructures for many years, and the Rural Utility Service programs fund and support broadband connections. The infrastructure package provides $65 billion in new broadband investment. So how will this new funding close the digital divide in the past programs have not been able to do? And how is the USDA's Rural Development Office coordinating with other agencies like the FCC to use the improvements in this next infrastructure bill?
Well, the biggest difference is that this is for the first time the amount of money that's necessary to actually get the job done. It is true that we've been engaged in this effort for quite some time, but we've been engaged with $1 billion, $2 billion, maybe $3 billion here or there. We've never had $65 billion basically allocated by Congress for this purpose. So number one, the size of the amount of money is significant. Secondly, the way in which this money is going to be distributed, a significant amount of it is going to go to states for states to be able to determine how best to utilize these resources to meet the demand. But we're going to put, at least at USDA, we're going to make sure that the upload and download speeds are significant. You're not going to get this money just by putting a line out there. It's got to be something that can actually provide people meaningful service. So I think the fact that this is a whole of government opportunity, that it's coordinated, it's adequately financed, it's going to include the states, I think creates a kind of a momentum if this bill gets passed to be able to actually get that to the most remote areas. I mean, it's limited. This is not about necessarily improving significantly existing. It's really about making sure that we get to unserved areas and underserved areas. And those are predominantly rural and remote areas. So I think it's a fundamentally different situation simply because of the size.
Thank you for that. It really is going to be a brand new endeavor, hopefully for us all. Do you know how can the FCC and things work with, how is this planning on working with the different organizations like that or different operations agencies? Well,
the resources is going to be allocated between the FCC, the National Institute of Technology Association, and I think it's NIT, and us at USDA. We'll receive a portion of that money, which will go into our Reconnect program, and our Reconnect program is really focused on trying to get people who have existing facilities, existing service, but it's 1 in 100 or 1 in 10 rather upload speeds to getting it to be 3 in 25 and then eventually 25 and 100. to essentially get the levels of speed significant enough to make a difference. So that's what our portion is going to be. We'll also obviously help folks be able to identify areas where we think there is a significant need. Right now, what's interesting about this is the mapping that takes place. There needs to be accurate information about precisely where the need is. You can see a map today that says 90% of America has broadband access. Well, when you have 1 in 10, you don't really have access. You can't really do much, and you sure as heck can't do distance learning and telemedicine and all the other things that are important to rural communities and rural families and farms with that kind of speed. So you really need to ask the question, how much of America has adequate speeds? Well, that percentage is probably closer to 60%. So there's a significant unmet need here, and both in terms of folks not having access at all and folks having need of higher speeds. Secondly, there is, I think, the belief on the part of some that 5G is the answer. Well, 5G is not the answer in rural America. The technology is such that the terrain is such that you can't have as many of those towers as you need to have 5G. You can do that in the city pretty easily. You can do it in a suburb. You can stick things on the top of buildings, but in rural areas, you're going to need fiber. So there's going to be a requirement that we look at ways in which we can encourage that fiber. Look at ways in which, for example, we could coordinate with the Department of Transportation. They have easements. They have right-of-way easements. Well, why not use those right-of-way easements for fiber? Utilities are now in the process of putting their lines underground. They've got easements. Why not figure out a way to use those easements? They're certainly working closely with the RECs. I think the RECs are primed to be big partners in this effort if we structure it right. We have some restrictions at USDA in terms of middle mile. We need to figure out ways in which we can work around those restrictions. We do have some flexibility, but not much. But the other entities have more flexibility, and so we'll be encouraging them to make sure that they use the right technology, if you will, to make sure that the service is what it needs to be.
Thanks for that, Mr. Secretary. Certainly, I happen to be in DC today. My connection is great, but anytime I go out to the farm, and Patty can appreciate that when she's at the dairy farm there in Wisconsin, that sometimes your meetings or those connections, whether it's business or work, really fall apart. So we appreciate the laser focus that you guys have on connectivity.
Don't be surprised if my presentation doesn't get interrupted, because I'm out in Iowa today. So could happen here.
Fair enough. Always a good opportunity to drive home the message there. The next question has to do with one that is on a lot of folks' minds, and that is the timing, what you might be able to share with us on the appointments of the state directors of farm service agencies, as well as the state rural development officials.
I'll tell you, I don't know. I'm sure there are people out there that are frustrated by this, but they can't be anywhere near as frustrated about it as I am. So just be clear about this. This is a very difficult process. It's a cumbersome process, and it takes a while. But the good news is that I think in the next 30 days, you're going to see appointments being made in both FSA offices and rural development offices. It's probably going to come in waves, if you will. The way this process works, they take 10 or 15 states, they get nominations, they seek information from senior Democratic officials in those states. They vet the people, and that's what takes forever, is the vetting process. And this administration's been very, very careful about the vetting process. I think probably more so than any previous administration I've been connected to. And so it takes a little bit longer. And there are obviously, a lot of positions that need to be filled. So the good news, I think you're going to begin to see appointments here in the next couple of weeks. And I think they're just going to continue to roll out over the course of the next 1 to 2 months. And hopefully by the end of October, early November, we've got a pretty good read on FSA and RD state directors. We know that they're really important because they are the voice. They're the eyes and ears for an administration, if you will, in each state, and it's important to get that feedback very directly from folks on the ground. And they're an important component, and we're anxious to have them on board.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, we we appreciate how USDA has been very focused on conservation and climate smart agriculture. How will this effort be farmer friendly rather than creating new burdens to farmers?
Well, it's funny you should ask that question because I just got back from Italy at the G20, and there was a lot of conversation, obviously, about climate and a lot of concern about it and the need for agriculture to take a bold step forward in terms of climate smart agricultural practices. And what my mission was, and that meeting was to make sure that we left there with a communique that understands and appreciates that there's more than one way to get to the climate goals that we need to get to, net zero emissions at some point in time in the future. There is the European way, in which they are essentially significantly altering their support structure and system and mandating certain activities and eliminating and prohibiting certain activities, which many producers in those countries, in member countries, are deeply concerned about whether or not it may impact and affect productivity. We in the U.S., I think, see it a little bit differently. We think that, and certainly at USDA, we think that a market-based, voluntary, incentive-based approach works best with our farmers. We've listened very carefully for a number of months. We've had a number of outreach efforts to try to find out precisely what farmers think and feel about all of this and how they would be positioned, or how we could be position them to be of most benefit to them in terms of how we structure this. Here's what we think. We think there is market value. We think there's a market opportunity here for product that it can be verifiably, sustainably produced. We think consumers across the United States are growing more and more interested in where their food comes from and how it's produced, and they want to make sure that they're not in their decisions, their food decisions, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions and so forth. We think there's a value-added proposition there, and we want farmers to be able to take full advantage of that value-added opportunity. And so we want to be able to reduce the risk. I mean, right now there's a risk. If I go and I ask you or Rob or any of the farmers watching this to take certain actions or to buy into certain technologies, well, that costs money. And the reality is that that's risky, especially when margins are so tight already. So how can USDA reduce the risk? By providing financial incentives and resources. How can we sort of walk before we run? How do we learn what works and what doesn't work? And how do we make sure that we quantify and measure it so that not only can farmers take full advantage of that market opportunity, but they also potentially can also look at carbon markets and other markets that are out there to be able to fully participate without necessarily incurring a substantial amount of cost on their side. And there are a lot of different ways to do this, and a lot of different practices and a lot of different approaches, and we want to make sure that we are de-risking all of those approaches. And I think by virtue of that, I think that will be very consistent with what we've heard from farmers, that they don't want to be told what to do. They kind of know what to do. They know there's financial cost involved. They want to know whether or not society sees it as their responsibility or society's responsibility to provide the resources. And from our perspective, we think it's society's responsibility to step up. And we're going to look for creative ways across the board. I mean, we are engaged in a number of different areas with reference to climate already, whether it's funding digesters, or whether it's our Renewable Energy for America program with energy efficiency on the farm, or whether it's some of the research projects that NIFA and ARS are engaged in terms of tools that we're providing, support tools. Whether it's the CRP program, or whether it's targeting our conservation resources towards climate smart agricultural practices. We know there are roughly 45 practices that work. We want to make sure that those practices are incented. Whether it's taking the RCPP program and utilizing it for regenerative agricultural opportunities to make sure that we are improving the soil health and improving productivity that way, and then taking a look at other ways in which we can provide the financial resource and the verification and the credibility, all the while basically giving farmers the ability to voluntarily embrace all of this. And then once we do that, we measure it, certify it, and then I think what we will show, I believe, that when we do this, if we do it right, that agriculture will be at the forefront of real aggressive action in terms of climate. We'll see more definitive results from that than perhaps some of the other industries that also have to significantly take a look at this, whether it's construction or whether it's transportation or the utilities. And I'm confident that we've listened, and I'm confident that we have a very good approach to this. I will tell you that I will be in Colorado next week, and we'll be laying this out in great detail next week. And I think when you hear what we lay out, you're going to say, gee, they actually did listen to us. They understood that it's about pilots, and it's about partnerships, and it's about listening to farmers, and it's about de-risking and reducing the risk associated with all of this. And I think I'm hopeful that you all will see that we've carefully listened to the concerns you've raised and the needs that you have.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer.
Alrighty. Well, Mr. Secretary, I know that you have other events. We appreciate the time today. I might, though, have you end with answering one final question. We've talked about a number of big challenges, right, facing agriculture as well as opportunities. But when you look at the challenges before us on climate, as well as ensuring that farmers and ranchers have a fair shake in the marketplace, and that it treats everyone fair all the way to the consumer. What about the future? What about beginning farmers and ranchers as they look at land prices, as they look at ways to try to get involved in producing food and living a lifestyle that they have a passion about? What is USDA doing to focus on that next generation?
Well, I would say two things, Robert. First of all, there's a beginning farmer program, which we recently announced. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $40 million of additional assistance to basically create the technical assistance and the access to technical assistance that young farmers need, beginning farmers need to be able to figure out what to do and how to do it well. But I think that the greater opportunity perhaps lies in the American Rescue Plan and the direction that that plan has provided to us to strengthen the supply chain and to focus on historically underserved producers, how to create market access, how to create land access that is an impediment to young farmers, beginning farmers being successful. I would say our efforts on local and regional food systems is a critical component to this, to the extent that we invest resources in expanding local systems and regional systems, and then linking those systems to purchasers. I'll give you an example of something that's pretty significant we've done recently that is designed to do this, and that's our temporary emergency food assistance program. Now, you would probably never in a million years think at an NFU fly-in that I would be talking about food assistance, but I am. And the reason I am is because we are trying what is called a flexible TFAP, a flexible emergency food system program, in which we are directing, it's a $1 billion commitment. We're directing 500 to 600 million of that $1 billion needs to be funneled not through national distributors of food, but through local and regional distributors. So that creates a new market opportunity that perhaps hasn't existed, or certainly magnifies a market opportunity that may have been there, but a relatively small one, when you're talking about putting $600 million into this process. And then an additional $300 million is designed to make sure that we are purchasing from those historically underserved and producers of beginning farmers and veteran farming operations. So it's a way in which we can steer some of our procurement resources at USDA towards that group of people that needs to be helped in order for them to stay in business. So using procurement, investing in the beginning farmer and rancher programs, expanding the processing capacity is also going to be helpful, especially as we look at very small and smaller operations, which will cater to that local and regional food system. Expanding our farm to school program creates another market opportunity particularly for beginning farmers. Making it easier to transition for farmers who may start off conventionally but decide they want the value-added opportunity of organic. Trying to figure out ways in which we can help them transition more easily and without necessarily penalizing them financially. Looking at ways in which the federal government can use its own land resources in a way that provides access to land. And then we have this resource under the American Rescue Plan, which could potentially provide resources to folks in the private sector, in the foundation world, that are interested in this very issue of making sure we have beginning farmers, making sure that we are addressing the next generation by making land available. So you could have a circumstance where the United States government pays someone X number of dollars for a rental of their farm. That farm then could be leased out at a much more reduced rate to beginning farmers, so that they in turn would have access to land that they might not otherwise have. And we see aspects of that throughout the country. I visited a similar situation in Minnesota recently, that the Hmong farmers in Minnesota had access to land that allowed them to grow their fruits and vegetables, and then they sell those fruits and vegetables at farmers markets and farm to school efforts and local restaurants and so forth. So it's a combination of all those things that we are engaged in and investing in. And this question is an important question because it gives me an opportunity to make sure that people understand there is a lot going on at USDA. I mean, there's a lot going on. And sometimes our challenge is making sure that people who need to know this know it. Because so much is going on, it's sometimes difficult to communicate everything that we are doing. But I can assure you that we're looking for every creative solution to the issue of land access for beginning farmers and market access.
Thank you, Secretary Vilsack, for all the time you've given us today. We really appreciate all the work you've done for us over the years, and as well as your willingness to talk to us today and to our members across the country. We really appreciate your leadership and your commitment to family farm agriculture. So thank you very much, Secretary Vilsack, for being with us.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
So we also have several USDA leaders on the webinar with us today, and they're going to provide updates on their work over the next 30 minutes or so. So we have a lot of ground to cover, so I'll provide some really quick introductions. I'll go through all the introductions and then we'll come back to the speakers. So Robert Bonney is the Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Climate Advisor at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Prior to joining USDA this year, Bonney was at Duke University working on conservation and environmental issues in rural America. During the second term of the Obama administration, Bonney was the Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at USDA. He oversaw the Forest Service and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Next, Zac Duchenneau is the administrator of the Farm Service Agency. Previously, he was the executive director at the Intertribal Agricultural Council, the largest, longest-standing Native American agriculture organization in the U.S. Ducheneaux has spent his career educating people about the critical role of improved food systems, value-added agriculture, and foreign exports to respond to economic and social challenges facing Native Americans and reservations. He operates his family farm along with his brothers on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation in north central South Dakota. Thank you for being with us today, Administrator Ducheneaux. We will also hear from Andy Green, who serves as USDA's Senior Advisor for Fair and Competitive Markets. Green was most recently a Senior Fellow for Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress. Prior to CAP, he served as counsel to Kara Stein, Commissioner of the U.S. Secretaries and Exchange Commission. We will also hear from Jenny Moffitt, who serves as USDA's Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs. Moffitt served as Undersecretary and Deputy Secretary at the California Department of Agriculture and Food, where she led climate efforts. Before joining CDFA, Moffitt ran her family's organic walnut farm and processing operations in Winters, California. We are very pleased to have you all here with us today. Farmers Union members, please enter your questions you'd like to ask using the Q&A box. We'll likely have time for a few more of them, and we'll submit any that we don't have time for to USDA for follow-up. So again, thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to hear from you. Mr. Bonney, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Patty. I'll be brief. You all just got a really good outline of USDA climate policy from the boss. So, but let me add just a little bit additional to it. You know, one of the good things about climate and agriculture is that there's a lot of alignment. The type of practices that are good for the climate can improve soil health and can add to more productive agricultural systems, turn waste into energy, look for ways to create new market opportunities for producers. That alignment is really, really important. But to take advantage of that, we need to make sure that whatever we do works for producers, it works for agriculture. And so thinking about how we design incentives and other opportunities for producers in a way that fits into their existing operations is really, really important. Secretary talked about our interest in incentive-based efforts, market-based opportunities. This is going to be a non-regulatory approach. It's going to be incentive-based. We're going to look for opportunities to create new market opportunities for producers. It's going to be collaborative. It's going to be about partnerships. And the good news is USDA is going to be in the lead. Rob LaRue and I, in the early part of the Obama administration, him on the Hill and me at USDA, there was a big debate, he'll remember, about whether USDA was going to be in charge of climate policy for the government or other folks. And I think USDA is really going to be in the driver's seat, and I think that's going to be important. A couple other things I'll just mention and then I'll stop. One is just the importance of addressing resilience. So when we think about climate smart ag, it's not just all about mitigation. It's making sure that we provide good information and help for producers to help make sure their operations are more resilient. We've done a number of things. Zac has been at the forefront of this, looking for ways that we can address drought this summer, extreme weather events and other things. We've got to continue to broaden that toolbox and look for ways to work with all of you to make sure we get that right, particularly going into the next Farm Bill. So resilience is critically important. Research, really important. Researching practices, technology, new types of innovation, but also making sure we get measurement and verification right so we can prove this stuff up. So you see some emphasis on that. The last thing I'll say is just the importance of equity. Equity across everything we do on climate. We have to make sure that what we do is available to small farmers as well as large farmers, that farmers of colors, tribes, others can participate. We have to think about, are there additional resources we need to provide in outreach, technical assistance, and other things. So that's going to be a very important area for us as well. Let me stop there and hand it back to you, Patty.
Thank you, Mr. Bonney. I appreciate your remarks there. Next, we'll turn it over to Zac Duchenneau.
Thank you, Patty, and thanks to the folks at the National Farmers Union. Rob, it's good to see you again. We got a chance to visit on a panel over there in Huron just a few weeks ago. I think rather than go through talking points, I'm going to be brief, follow the lead of Mr. Bonney, and share with you some of the things that you can't just read on a fact sheet. There's a guy that works across the hallway from me here that's here at 5:30 in the morning every day. And he's tough to keep up with. And we'll talk a little bit about the FSA staff and the work that they've been doing on behalf of all of the producers out there, with the support of the Secretary, to exercise the maximum amount of flexibility that we can demonstrate and find, but also with significant stakeholder input. And that exists all throughout the agency. The staff here at the headquarters office are some that all of you would be proud to have on your farm helping out, the hours they put in, their dedication to the cause. And what's really important about the work they're doing is they adopt that same philosophy that we do out there on the farm or ranch. If something needs doing, we do it. The FSA is kind of the catch-all for all the department's ad hoc programs. We jump out there and do it. We did a pandemic assistance for timber haulers and harvesters program this year in partnership with our friends at the Forest Service. We'd never done timber before, but it needed to be done. And true to our farmers and ranchers that we serve, we stepped up and did it. We've got a slate of disaster programs that we're really exploring our flexibility in. An example of that comes from a drought tour that I was able to do across North Dakota, seeing some of your members up there. The transport of freight was going to be an issue. So with the support of the Secretary and the department, we were able to find some flexibility in that and roll out a couple of weeks ago an emergency assistance for livestock and honeybees and fish amendment that's going to allow us to help farmers and ranchers pay for freight to get hay to their cattle so that we can keep that cattle herd together as the Secretary leads the charge working through those market concentration issues that we are all experiencing. The only other thing I want to touch on is we need your input. We continue to solicit input from our stakeholders as we do the extra things that we're going to do. We're looking for that flexibility in our existing programs, in our farm loan programs. Right now, we've got an emergency loan that isn't as good as our regular loans. So we want to find the flexibility. How can we do things better? And we're looking across the government to find those efficiencies and learn. Many of your producers probably use the EIDL loan from SBA. So we're reaching out to SBA to try to find out how they were able to deliver that so efficiently and quickly, having never done agriculture before. I'm going to stop there, leave some time for questions, but I really appreciate the support of the Farmers Union and look forward to seeing you all out in the pasture somewhere.
Thank you, Administrator. I'm sure you'll see many of us in our offices later this year. A lot of them farmers that are dealing with drought programs are definitely going to be looking for some assistance, I'm sure. So it looks like we may have lost Andy. Hopefully he'll join us again. So I think we'll turn it right over to Jenny. So Jenny Moffitt, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. And Andy is not in Iowa, but he is having internet problems. So just harkening back to what the Secretary said, even in Washington, D.C., we need apparently some support and bandwidth issues. But no, actually, in all honesty, it's a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm Jenny Lester Moffitt, and I come from from California and my family's farm, where I know well the challenges of internet. Working on our farm for 10 years, we had satellite internet, and doing the paperwork and all the things that we need to do for our suppliers and for compliance is really hard when you're on satellite internet. So I know of the importance of that. And hopefully Andy will be on soon. But I just wanted to say a few words and to say hi to all of you guys. Again, as someone who does come from a family farm, I know how important the work is on each of our family farms, the work that we're doing to grow food, fiber, flora for the nation and around the world. Certainly, as Secretary said, we're in a pivotal moment in the United States with the pandemic and all of the disruption we saw in the supply chain. And as Administrator Ducheneaux just mentioned, we're really stepping up and getting things done. We're doing things that we hadn't done 2 years ago, and that's a really great thing. So within the marketing and regulatory program, that means that we're doing things like really deep food system work, really bolstering local and regional food supply chains that the Secretary talked about already. And I know as someone who comes from agriculture, who comes from a State Department of Agriculture, how important that work is. But how important it is that as we're doing this work, that we're hearing from you guys, because you guys are our eyes and ears on the ground. You're living this day in and day out. And so just as Administrator Ducheneaux said to all of you, we want to hear the same. Please give us our feedback, give feedback to us, share your ideas, thoughts. We really do want to hear from you, engage with you, and partner with you guys throughout this process. Let's see if Andy is back on. Yeah, I don't think he is. So I'll just say a few words about the work that we're doing, but the Secretary really did dive deep into it. But a key part of the work that we're doing is really bolstering more, better, fairer markets for the food supply chain. This is about getting a higher share of the food dollar back to the family farmers. It's about connecting consumers and producers through local and regional supply chains. It's about new revenue streams for producers. And it's also about fairer markets and fairer marketplace practices, which the Secretary talked a lot about on our competition work. And so let's see, I think we have Mike on. Mike's turning his camera on, so maybe he'll pop in and talk a little bit about the fairer market stuff. But I just want to say thank you guys for your partnership. I know you've engaged with us a lot, and I hope that you'll continue to engage with us in the coming years and months on this really, really important work on fairer markets, on the competition stuff. So I'll pass it on to Mike and Katie, who will cover that.
Thanks, Undersecretary. This is Mike Schmidt. I'm Senior Advisor in the Office of the Secretary, helping with Andy with some of the competition work. A lot of you probably know me, maybe without the beard, depending on what time period you knew me. Patty, I don't know if I've seen you since the COVID beard. So Appreciate the working with the Farmers Union. It's always a great conversation. As many of you know, I was with Stabenow staff, and before that with Feingold, so and the Obama administration. So I had a lot of different hats and involvement. The one thing I'll highlight on the competition work is that in the past, we've tended to put all of our eggs in one basket and gone sort of mostly the regulatory approach. And then when we've hit bumps in the road, we haven't had sort of alternatives and we haven't had other work streams moving. I think a really important part of this effort and this effort where we're reaching across sort of all of government and working with the White House is that we're looking at these other alternatives. So let's invest in capacity also. And at the same time, make sure there's a cop on the beat and make sure we're coordinating with DOJ to make sure if there's a price fixing case that it gets prosecuted, and looking at the mergers and the other pieces too. So by doing all of those things at once and also looking for opportunities to give consumers choices, I think there's a great opportunity to make more progress and also not be in a situation where you spend a lot of time, you get a lot of energy, you get a lot of excitement from your members and others, and then be left a little disappointed at the end. So that's exciting to me for me. You know, I was chief of staff. I was acting chief of staff at GIPSA when there still was a GIPSA. So it's exciting for me to see sort of this change in approach and this broader approach. And I think with the fire in Kansas, with the pandemic, there's a greater realization amongst more and more, especially ranchers, especially in the beef industry, of how little sort of power they have, how much has gone away over the last decades, where a lot of your members, I know you recognized that early and you were talking to us for the last couple of decades on it, but getting that broader recognition, getting that broader support, I think this feels like there's a real opportunity to make some change both in the administration side and also on Congress seems more likely to act now than they ever have, sort of, at least during my career on competition issues. Katie, if you have anything else you want to add to that, otherwise we should leave some time for questions.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add there on the competition space is I know a lot of the folks on this phone have been in the trenches talking about and working for fairer markets in the past, and appreciate that there can be a challenge. And so your engagement here today, but also before now and after now, helping folks understand how these issues hit you and hit your pocketbooks and hit your rural communities at home is just crucially important. It's hard to talk to folks who have never marketed cattle before, why the nuances on how we report different kinds of transactions or how we enforce a centuries old rules, why that matters to you today. So just want to send a big thank you for the work you've already spent there and encourage you to continue helping unpack what can be sometimes really complicated issues. So folks see what the end result could actually be if we're successful in some of these efforts. So I'll just add my thanks for giving us some time today.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Mike. And it is great to see you again, Mike. It has been quite some time, I think, prior to COVID. So, but we really appreciate all of you guys being with us today. I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit and ask our first question on working lands. So working lands conservation programs are historically oversubscribed, and NRCS has had trouble staffing up. What is USDA doing to make sure NRCS is positioned to handle necessary additional investments in climate-smart agriculture?
Yeah, I lost you there for a minute. So I'm assuming that question's headed my way. So it's an important question, and we've got we need to increase the capacity of NRCS through additional hiring, and the team is working hard on that now. But that can't be the only thing. We've also got to think about increased partnerships. We have to be more efficient in how we partner with other folks, but thinking about how do we utilize partnerships to get more work done on the ground, and leveraging those partnerships. So I think that's really important. We, in fact, had a long conversation this morning with the chief about exactly that, about capacity, about making sure that we can deliver on these resources. We're confident we can. We both have to think about building back NRCS's staff but also thinking about what are the partnerships with other folks out in the field that will make this work more smoothly.
Thank you, Mr. Bonney.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're going to try to continue to field some questions from our members. Folks have found the Q&A box there, so feel free to continue to use it. We'll do as many questions as we can in our time today, but then we do appreciate the department's willingness to consider questions that come in that we just don't have time to address right now. But next question. It gets really confusing sometimes with all these different pools of money that have come out in response to pandemic, the disruptions, the kind of rebuild and so forth. But obviously, one part of that funding stream, $500 million for resiliency in the meat supply sector. There was the request for input. A lot of our members took advantage of that, both individually and also through their state organization. Can you speak to kind of the next steps and ways that we can continue to kind of engage to make sure that we are, and continue to be a solid partner in helping build local and regional food system resiliency?
Yeah, so thank you all for your comments. Again, as I said before, and I'll continue to say, we need to hear from you. And so we received well over 400 comments that we received them on August 30th. And so we want to thank you for those comments. Our team is pouring through those comments. Your input is valuable. And so we're taking the time to take those comments and really pour through them, and then also start to think about how do we distill all of those comments into a program that invests that $500 million. It's going to be multi-pronged. We know that we need a blend of both infrastructure investments as well as human capital investments, as well as everything in between and technical assistance. And so really looking and taking all the input that we receive from you is incredibly valuable. As far as the next steps beyond that, we'll be working on crafting what does that look like? What does the funding look like for the program? And then we'll be putting that out to you all in the form of different grant proposals in the coming months. And in the coming months.
Alrighty, thanks. It sounds like there's obviously a massive amount of work. We'll be watching carefully for those next steps. Thanks so much. Patty?
Sure. My next question is FSA is my comments and questions here. FSA has really stepped up to the plate in response to the drought and the wildfires this past year. There's also been some major adjustments on flexibility for crop insurance and dairy programs. With that in mind, are there ways that we can help to provide input on how disaster programs could work better? Or do you see any things that we need to do for the next steps coming up?
Yeah, well, just keep providing feedback on what's working and what's not. And it's important to make sure we balance that. There are some things that are working real well for the folks out in the countryside and others that might not. And we're interested in addressing those things that aren't working by taking examples of what is. There's a farm bill discussion that's going to start next year. National Farmers Union always plays a pivotal role in getting progressive action in that farm bill. Keep up that good work, and I'll turn it over to Mike or Mr. Bonney if they want to add anything to that.
I think for the most part, Zach, you covered it. Let us know where. I think we're all facing a new world here with climate change. We're seeing more severe droughts, more frequent flooding. All of those things are adding up. And as a department and also as FSA, we're seeing, well, we've designed some programs, but they're getting overwhelmed. Or we don't have all of the right tools. Maybe we have some tools for livestock assistance, but no great permanent tools for crop producers that are facing such a severe drought and sort of lack of ability to plant. And then there's also some really hard conversations. If we're going to see climate shifts that are permanent, do we need to think about different production methods, shifts from irrigated to non-irrigated or to livestock? those are things where, we don't, USDA isn't in a role where we tell producers what to do or what they should do, but it would be great to interact with your members and think about, are there some tools that we could provide you your members better options to make some choices, to make some transitions if that's what we have to do. Just ignoring the fact that maybe your dryland farm is becoming more of a desert and no ability to sort of pump more water, things like that. I mean, it's a little dire. It's a little, but planning for it and seeing what tools we can do and what are those tools in both RMA, NRCS, FSA, sort of across the board. I think that'd be extremely helpful.
Appreciate that, Mike. And actually, one of the refreshing things that I've been hearing as a theme from the secretary and then from everyone here is the continuing kind of flexibility. A lot of the challenges that we have in front of us are ones that are evolving pretty dramatically in ways that we can't always predict. That added with all the kind of varied diversity of operations and geographics and weather, we really appreciate building as much flexibility into all this programs as you can. We're continuing to try to field a lot of the questions. Our members aren't shy about asking, so we definitely won't be able to get through all of them. But next question is one that I hear frequently in the climate space, and that is the question around early adopters. And how is the department looking at ways to acknowledge the benefits of those early adopters, but build those into a system that will work with the programs now and into the future?
So I'll start out, and then others may want to chime in. It's a really important issue. We've got a lot of folks that have been leading on soil health and other things for a long, long time. And if all we did was give credit for actions or carbon or whatever it is from here on, we're going to leave lots of those folks behind. So I think it's really important as we think about designing new programs that we take that into account. There are lots of ways you can deal with it. You can reward people for simply implementing climate smart agriculture and forestry practices to give them a reward for those things, even if maybe on some of those lands they're not going to add significant new stores of carbon or otherwise improve their greenhouse gas footprint. That's one way to think about it. You can also think about programs that do a look back, that provide some reward for that. Obviously, there are ways to think about CSP, which rewards producers for the conservation they've undertaken. So we think this is a really important issue. And the secretary mentioned we've already taken a lot of input on this. There are going to be more opportunities for input on this issue and a lot of others. I think we'd welcome the conversations to make sure we create incentives that reward people not only for what they're going to do, but the good stewards that they've already been.
Thank you. Patty.
Sure. The secretary mentioned the consumer surveys earlier and the product of the USA label. We know that farmers want to have the ability to market US meat products and believe that by making cool country of origin labeling mandatory, we can ensure consumers know where their food comes from and that they are supporting that and other ranchers. What's the next steps for getting cool beyond just the product of the USA labeling? Is there something else that we see coming down the pike to get country of origin labeling mandatory for our farmers?
Yeah, thank you for that. And we care deeply about making sure that consumers have accurate information about what food that they're eating, and that farmers are fairly represented in the marketplace as well with their products. As you mentioned, Patty, the World Trade Organization has ruled against previous mandatory country of origin labeling. And so we're really in a position now where we're looking through different options and opportunities. So I'll just quote the secretary from earlier this year. when he said we're absolutely willing to listen to anyone who has an idea about how the U.S. can implement cool where WTO doesn't slap it down, as he said. So please, we were interested in hearing your ideas, and because we certainly want to look into this space, and pass it to Mike or Katie if there's anything additional on that. Okay.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And let the record show that National Farmers Union continues to be a very strong supporter of reinstating mandatory country of origin labeling. And we will continue to use every opportunity to push for it. So thank you for the openness with that issue. And in the absence or before we achieve that, continue to look at ways to make sure that the food that consumers are receiving is accurately labeled. For our ranchers in particular, it's incredibly frustrating, but they certainly appreciate the leadership of this administration in making sure that consumers can finally have accurately labeled product there. So thank you for that. Let's see here. Want to continue to go through the questions. We have a number of questions actually on both the work that's already been mentioned on Packers and Stockyards Act, and it's a shame we weren't able to celebrate its 100th anniversary with a big kind of like hooray, this has been fantastic. It's been more like, oh my gosh, it's 100 years old. We really need to update this. Obviously, for those of us that have been tracking this has been a little frustrating over the years and the slow speed. But we are encouraged by the Secretary's commitment, with the administration's commitment to bring about fairness and to look at kind of revamping this. Is there any more that you could share beyond, obviously, the rulemaking that is going to be coming up about diving into definitions within the Packers and Stockyards Act, other maybe approaches that you're looking at to bring greater transparency to the marketplace? Anything related to that would be certainly welcome.
I think to your main point, Rob, we see sort of some of the similar things is where it's an older authority, it's 100 years old, may need some modernization, but we also want to make sure we're leaning in and sort of enforcing what we do have as strongly as we can, because that's also the way you identify where are those gaps, and then hopefully work with a willing Congress to sort of provide some additional authority and fill some of those gaps, especially with the Farm Bill coming up. So agree there, and that's our plan. Probably can't go much further on details of what's going to be in the proposals. I would just encourage groups like NFU to think about being ready for when these are going to be proposed rules. So there's going to be a chance to comment, and those comments are really important, and being able to articulate sort of some economic analysis and some sort of ability for you to put forward sort of why these are important for producers and maybe even consumers, and be able to put some numbers behind that to the extent that you have some resources to do some of those things is really important, because I think some of the other comments they're going to bring those economic analysis, those comments also. So having something to work with from all sides is going to be important in this whole process as we move forward. As you have other ideas, if there's other things that labeling ideas, things like that, where you can use transparency that way and consumer power, and sort of making sure that we have fairness or a label related to fairness in treated producers, things like that. I think we're open to sort of those expanded conversations also beyond just the Packers and Stockyards. And as you noticed on the Hill, there's several different proposals related to price discovery and transparency, and setting minimums for sort of making sure that we have proper price discovery and sort of free market, spot market trades, things like that. We certainly, it's a we also, we're ready to provide that technical assistance. We're ready to work with the sponsors of those to sort of make sure it's going to work, make sure it's going to work in our system. There's obviously a delicate line here because, the administration doesn't, at least at our level, doesn't lobby, doesn't take those positions, doesn't propose the legislation. We aren't the legislators. I don't know if there's anything else, Katie or Jenny, if you want to add to that, but it's in that all of the above mantra and wanting to work together. But I think an important thing that we can do right now is think about that there's going to be some rules coming up, and comments are really important. It's really important that we have those comments to work from, because that's what really drives the direction you head on any proposed rule.
Well, it's probably fitting that our time, unfortunately, is up, but that we finish on Packers and Stockyards Act and kind of related competition fair issues. We are joined by our guest from Department of Justice now, but let me again thank everyone from USDA for joining us today, continuing to be a strong partner with our family farmer and rancher members. And we certainly want to continue to work together to improve conditions out there for those farmers, for the rural communities, as well as consumers out there. So once again, thanks so much, USDA.
Thank you.
And at this point, it is my honor to introduce our next guest. We're joined now by Vanita Gupta, the U.S. Associate Attorney General from the Department of Justice. Attorney General Gupta supervises multiple litigating divisions, including the Department of Justice, including the Antitrust Division, which we keep a close eye on, and the Environmental and Natural Resources Division. Associate Attorney General Gupta previously served as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the nation's oldest and largest coalition of nonpartisan civil rights organizations in the United States. During the latter parts of the Obama administration, she served as the Acting Assistant Attorney General and the head of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Prior to her tenure leading the Civil Rights Division, Associate Attorney General Gupta served as Deputy Legal Director and the Director of the Center for Justice at the American Civil Liberties Union. She began her legal career as an attorney at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and we're so excited to hear from her today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for inviting me to address the National Farmers Union. I bring greetings today, this afternoon, from the Attorney General. In defining the Justice Department's top priorities, the Attorney General has placed reinvigorating antitrust enforcement at the center of the department's focus on ensuring economic opportunity and fairness. And I do think that was the perfect segue teed up for me as they were talking about rules and the importance of the union issuing comments. And this is all work that we support, but also with all of the antitrust work. And that's why I wanted to speak with you today. As you mentioned, Rob, I oversee a portfolio that touches on a wide range of issues, from voting rights to competition to consumer protection. And I'm really excited to address this group because farmers have such an important and special place in our economy. You help put food on the table for American families. You drive innovation in food and consumer products. You anchor communities across the country. In fact, in my home state of Pennsylvania, farms employ people in every single county in the Commonwealth, generating more than 579,000 jobs and $26 billion in revenue. And so it's really therefore vital that farmers benefit from a free, fair, and competitive economy for agricultural products. Competition means more choice when deciding where to buy and sell, and ultimately more money in the pockets of American farmers. This also helps American consumers and the American economy, our national security, and our health. We all succeed when farmers succeed, and we all benefit from robust competition in agricultural markets. During the pandemic, processors in several agricultural markets, such as poultry, beef, and hogs, have generated record profits. And American farmers have seen just the opposite. While consumers are paying more, farmers are making less. And the gap between the price at auction and the price at the grocery store has left many farmers with serious questions about the power of these processors. It also underscores the problem of a market structure where one or just a few buyers have the power to effectively set prices for the goods that family farmers sell. And when buyers have the ability to dictate terms to their workers or suppliers like farmers, they can squeeze them for lower wages or lower prices without passing any savings on to consumers. And these problems go beyond cattle, poultry, or hogs. As President Biden recently recognized in an executive order urging a whole of government approach to combating consolidation, consolidation in the agricultural industry is making it too hard for small family farms to survive. And as a result, fewer and fewer companies control the production of fruits, vegetables, dairy, and other essentials. This has real consequences for American farmers and families. Fewer choices mean lower prices when you sell and higher prices when you buy. And it shifts power from local communities to large corporations. It makes food more expensive without benefiting those who grow it. And the department takes these concerns seriously. As the president's order requires, we are taking a government-wide approach to address them. As an example, the department is working with the United States Department of Agriculture to strengthen and enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act, which, as was discussed, passed in 1921 and celebrated its 100th anniversary just last week. The Packers and Stockyards Act was inspired, as you know, by a report from the Federal Trade Commission, finding that 5 great packing companies had attained such a dominant position that the producer of livestock was at the mercy of these 5 companies. Their tactics included illegal conspiracies and antitrust violations, as well as a broad range of unfair and deceptive practices. As the FTC noted at the time, Packers employed practically every tried method of unfair competition known, including short weighing and price discrimination. They also invented new and pretty ruthless methods when it suited them. The result, in the words of the Supreme Court, was that Packers could arbitrarily lower prices to the shipper who sells and arbitrarily increase the price to the consumer who buys. These problems are familiar. There's too much power in the hands of a few buyers creates a bottleneck between producers and consumers. And as a result, payments to farmers go down and consumer prices go up. And grocery stores see shortages while farmers struggle to sell their goods. The Packers and Stockyards Act was designed to help, and it took on specific practices by requiring stockyards to maintain accurate weights and promptly pay shippers. It also allowed the USDA, with the help from the Justice Department, to pursue other unfair and deceptive practices that the Packers might invent in the future. And the Packers and Stockyards Act really can be an important tool for addressing anti-competitive, unfair, and deceptive practices, but we know that we can and must do more to realize its potential. President Biden's executive order on competition is a good start. It calls on the USDA to strengthen its regulations concerning unfair, unjustly discriminatory, or deceptive practices under the Packers and Stockyards Act. USDA has already announced its intention to pass new rules implementing the president's executive order on competition, and I know you all were just discussing that. The Department of Justice has expressed its support for these efforts, including our willingness to work hand in hand with the USDA to use our combined enforcement authorities to protect American farmers, ranchers, and consumers. I also have personally directed the Antitrust Division to work with the Department of Agriculture to support the revision of Packers and Stockyard Act rules. Additionally, USDA has invested $500 million to support new entrants in meat and poultry processing, which will expand the choices available to farmers and consumers. These efforts build on the department's longstanding partnership with the USDA. In 1999, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the USDA, and our collaboration under that MOU really goes both ways. In some cases, USDA refers matters to the division, to the Antitrust Division. In other cases, we work closely with the USDA to leverage their expertise in understanding how a merger might affect specific agricultural markets. And we've benefited tremendously from this partnership, including in recent cases involving grain elevators and crop insurance. Last year, we worked with USDA in issuing a pandemic-related business review letter to the National Pork Producers Council. We've also held joint workshops to hear directly from farmers, growers, ranchers, and producers. And we're working with the USDA and other agencies to fight excessive concentration in other agricultural markets too, including markets for seeds, fertilizer, feed, pesticides, and equipment. These industries have a significant impact on the ability of small and independent farmers to make a living. We're therefore going to vigorously police mergers that may lessen competition in these and other markets, such as our successful challenge to JBS's proposed acquisition of National Beef. We will also bring cases to challenge anti-competitive conduct in already concentrated industries when the facts and the law support it. We're going to continue to advance the interest of American farmers and consumers through our amicus program, which allows us to put forward legal positions in lawsuits that we didn't bring. And that includes urging courts not to use the Capper-Volstead Act to immunize an alleged monopolist accused of harming independent farmers, the very people that the Capper-Volstead Act was meant to protect. Let me shift gears for a second to our criminal program. The department's criminal program also depends on working closely with other federal agencies to pursue price fixing, bid rigging, and market allocation across the economy, including in agricultural markets that range from food to farmland. For example, the prosecutors at the Antitrust Division partnered with the FBI, the Department of Commerce, and the USDA to investigate and prosecute a long-running nationwide conspiracy to fix the price of broiler chickens. It's a staple food for millions of Americans. To date, our investigation has resulted in cases against 14 executives and employees and 3 companies. And that includes Pilgrim's Pride, one of the nation's largest chicken producers, which pled guilty in February and was fined $107 million for its role in the conspiracy. It's the highest fine ever obtained for a domestic antitrust conspiracy. Fixing the price of commodities like chickens robs farmers and consumers of the benefits of a competitive economy. It means farmers get less, consumers pay more, and criminals profit. The department won't hesitate to investigate and prosecute these kinds of schemes. And that includes, where appropriate, prosecuting the executives responsible, because nobody is above the law. The department has also aggressively prosecuted bid rigging. For example, in May of 2021, the department obtained an indictment against 2 individuals for accepting a $40,000 side payment to stop bidding in an auction for farmland and timber rights in Kentucky. Bid rigging is actually particularly troubling in agricultural markets because farmers, growers, and ranchers depend on auctions to sell many of their goods, from produce to livestock. And the Antitrust Division is dedicated to deterring and detecting crimes that would distort these auctions and affect farmers. That conduct is unjust and it's illegal. In addition to working with our federal agency partners, many of our cases start with reports from members of the public. And we welcome reports about price fixing, bid rigging, market allocation, or other anti-competitive conduct through the Antitrust Division's Citizen Complaint Center, which you can find on the Department of Justice's website at justice.gov. Let me just end by emphasizing that we understand that this work is urgently needed. Consolidation in agricultural markets has reached a tipping point, making it hard for small family farms and growers to survive. Farmers are being forced to bargain with large processors when they buy and sell goods, squeezing your profits while Americans pay more at the grocery store. Poultry farmers, hog farmers, cattle ranchers, and other agricultural workers are struggling under the weight of consolidation, climate change, and other crises. We are very aware of these strains. While antitrust laws, of course, play an important role in helping to keep markets competitive, they simply aren't going to address all of the complex issues that are facing American agriculture. And it's why the president's executive order recognized that federal agencies with different mandates and different tools have to work together to meet their common goals. And that's why the department is going to work closely with USDA to combine its law enforcement abilities with the regulatory and enforcement tools used by the USDA to make the markets fairer for farmers and ranchers. But I firmly believe that vigorous antitrust enforcement is an essential part of addressing many of these problems. American farmers aren't asking for a handout. They want an opportunity to compete on a level playing field and to buy at a price that is set by the free market, not unlawful monopolists. To sell at a price driven by competition, not their most powerful customers. And just like every other American farmers, ranchers, and producers are entitled to these benefits and to a free, fair, and competitive economy. So thank you all for inviting me to be here today to listen in a little bit in the minutes preceding this talk, but I hope that you know that the Justice Department is hard at work to protect competition for American farmers. Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you very much, Associate Attorney General Gupta. Really welcome words. It's incredibly encouraging to hear the commitment to free, fair, and competitive markets, which is, as you well stated, exactly what family farmers and ranchers are looking for here. And we certainly appreciate the partnership that we have with the Department of Justice, and we look forward to continued commitment. We appreciate also, I should say, the administration's government-wide effort through this, through agencies working together. So your commitment to continuing to help U.S. Department of Agriculture and their enforcement, the Packers and Stockyards Act, and their update of that is also very much appreciated. Once again, on behalf of our members, thank you for your work and for your time today. Right, Farmers Union members, this concludes. We have a few announcements for today, but I hope that you found some value in our speakers today. Unfortunately, we are rarely able to answer all your, get all of your questions answered, but we will work with the Department of Agriculture to make sure that any questions that weren't addressed do receive a reply there. A couple of additional items here. If you missed part of this session, including President Biden's welcome message, you'll be able to watch a recording on our webpage, which is www.nfu.org. I should say a good luck and thanks once again for all the work that you're going to be doing this week with your congressional meetings. And I hope that you can join us tomorrow. As the Secretary nodded, NFU will be holding a press conference to publicly announce the launch of our Fairness for Farmers campaign. We expect to be joined by Senators Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota and John Tester of Montana at 1 p.m. Eastern. It will be an important step forward in our advocacy work. You can watch by registering with a link on our Fly-In website or watch it streaming live on Facebook. We talk about this issue of fairness for farmers. This really is our anti-competitive or anti-monopoly to make sure that we have fair and competitive markets. You've heard that theme a lot today. We also know that as Farmers Union members, this is very much in our DNA. This is the reason why we started our important work supporting our farmers and rural communities back in 1902. It is because of Farmers Union members' work that we ended up 100 years ago with the Packers and Stockyards Act. And we are called upon once again to continue to tell our stories of how consolidation throughout the agricultural and food chain is really having a negative effect, yes, on consumers, but certainly for our members, family farmers and ranchers, and those communities that are affected. So we hope that you can join us once again for that event, 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. And on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, be sure to come by for the Fly-In wrap-up event, where I understand you'll get a chance to play bingo, win some prizes, reflect on the week's activities, and take a virtual tour of our new office space for here in DC at NFU. Hope you can join us for a little fun on Thursday, once again at 6 p.m. Eastern, and the link will be available on the Fly-In website. With that, we're at the end of today's program. Thanks again, everyone, for your time and attention, and thanks for your important work in support of family farmers and ranchers.